Welcome back to E3, Engage and Empower with Empathy. Last week, we talked about building bridges at work with Kowal Smith. We talked about how we can be better colleagues and friends and really strengthen those connections and build team dynamics. This week's episode of Building Bridges at Work, we're going to do a little fun exercise. So let's get into it. Although usually the expert facilitators at Reflection Point meet in groups of 20 people, Anne and I are going to do a little abbreviated version of a typical Reflection Point session where the group discusses a work of literature and then the group reflects on challenges they're facing in the workplace. So I've asked Anne to address the topic of workplace empathy. And so what I'll do is I'll read the poem, and then I would love for you, Anne, to tell us why you chose this particular poem, and then we can start our little mini session. I have no idea what to expect, so this is going to be fun.
Absolutely.
All right, so What Work Is by Philip Levine. We stand in the rain in a long line waiting at Ford Highland Park for work. You know what work is. If you're old enough to read this, you know what work is, although you may not do it. Forget you. This is about waiting, shifting from one foot to another, feeling the light rain falling like mist into your hair, blurring your vision until you think you see your brother ahead of you, maybe 10 places. You rub your glasses with your fingers, and of course it's someone else's brother, narrower across the shoulders than yours, but with the same sad slouch, the grin that does not hide the stubbornness, the sad refusal to give in to rain, to the hours of wasted waiting, to the knowledge that somewhere ahead there's a man waiting who will say, "No, we're not hiring today," for any reason he wants. You love your brother. Now, suddenly you can hardly stand the love flooding you for your brother who's not beside you or behind or ahead because he's home trying to sleep off a miserable night shift at Cadillac so he can get up before noon to study his German. Works 8 hours a night so he can sing Wagner, the opera you hate most, the worst music ever invented. How long has it been since you told him you loved him, held his wide shoulders, opened your eyes wide and said those words and maybe kissed his cheek? You've never done something so simple, so obvious, not because you're too young or too dumb, not because you're jealous or even mean or incapable of crying in the presence of another man. No, just because you don't know what work is. Powerful stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us why did you choose this poem in particular?
So, in a world of millions and millions of stories and books, and like I said, we primarily do stories in Reflection Point. What struck me about this poem was that even though it was written in the 90s, maybe even earlier, and it certainly reverts back to a time that's even earlier than that, it seems to capture a moment that we're going through right now, right? Redefining this concept of what work is, right? What is work? And I think we think of work in such generic terms. Everybody knows what work is. Everybody knows what it means to work. And yet, I think no two people have the same definition. And so I thought this poem might be an interesting way for Rebecca, for you and I to explore what does it mean to work and what is work. So I'll start by maybe asking you a question, and then we can go back and forth and turn it into a conversation, because this isn't about, me asking questions and you having answers. This is very much about a discussion in which we can build off what we say, and it'll go places that neither of us really know where it will go. And that's good. That's part of the beauty, right? So what this poem brings up for me when I think about it right now is this concept that has been bandied about for the last few years: bring your whole self to work. Bring your whole self to work. So in what way does this poem help you to shape or define what that could possibly mean? What does it mean to bring your whole self to work?
It's a great question. And I think when I read through this poem, it made me think about, the particular workplace dynamic that was happening during this time frame in the early 20th century, where people were basically viewed as machines. They were just, going to work and not really bringing the human side or the human component to the workplace. And it's such an interesting contrast between, what he's experiencing standing in line, hoping that when he gets to the front of the line, the man will say, yes, we have a job for you. As he's thinking emotionally about his brother and how he loves his brother and how he hasn't been affectionate with him in a while. So there's almost this weird juxtaposition between this, I'm just a machine, a cog in the wheel, waiting in line for work, whatever that is. And then there's this, human side of me that's emotional and connects with my brother. And so it's almost like, how can you combine those two things, work and the emotional side of what it means to be human, and bring that to the workplace? That
Yeah.
was my first thought when I read it.
No, I agree with you. And I had a very similar kind of reaction to, in the first part of the poem, people are so kind of generic that he can't tell whether that person is his brother or isn't his brother, right? So, as workers, they're one of many. But as he starts to reflect on his brother and why his brother does the work in order to enable him to learn German so he can be an opera singer, then you realize that every single worker is one of a kind, right? One of many, one of a kind. So there's that incredible tension that in many ways, resonates very deeply with the debates that we seem to be having right now around what do we bring to work, and is it about us or is it about some generic idea of what work should be? So I totally agree with you in that sense. You have a long history doing lots of different things in pretty corporate settings. At what point do you find that your work shapes your identity, or your identity shapes your work? Or is there some other relationship between who you, Rebecca, are and, your CV, if you think back to it?
I've actually seen this a lot in very senior leaders, where they associate their identity with their role and their job. And I've always been, and this is just me personally, my personality as well, I've always disassociated my role, my job title, with who I am as a person and what I represent. So I basically bring Rebecca and my identity to work, whatever my work is. I've spent most of my corporate life in sales, marketing, and strategy roles. But if someone were to come up to me on the street and ask me, Rebecca, what do you do for a living? I wouldn't say, I'm a marketing leader or I'm a sales leader. I would say something like, I'm passionate about using empathy as a tool to build bridges and drive positive change for a future that's better for all of us. So it has nothing to do with my job title. It's just my purpose and how I see the world and what I want to do to make a difference in the world. And that I can carry with me no matter what my job title is. I mean, I could go be a barista in a coffee shop and I would still have that same response.
Yeah,
I would
because you're
just
then
find a
making the
way.
perfect cup of coffee for somebody, right? The thing that really
Yes.
meets their needs. Yeah.
And I would give them a smile. I would ask them how their day is.
Mm.
It's just a different way of serving coffee than, just going through the motions.
Yeah.
So that's how I view it. It doesn't matter what your job title is. It's who do you want to be in the world and how do you want to make a difference, and then bring that to your work.
Do you think it's generational?
I mean, it could be. I was raised in an environment where my mother stayed at home. My father was the primary breadwinner. He's a baby boomer. Uh, he was very passionate about his work and highly motivated, but always had time for the family. He wasn't like the workaholic type where you'd never see him and he was just never around. But both of my parents always told my sister and I, follow your dream. We just want you to be happy, follow your dream. And maybe that's why millennials feel like their dreams are being shot down, because that's what we've been told in
Yeah.
the late 80s, early 90s when we were growing up. But I still truly believe in that. And there's a lot of self-leadership involved there. You can't wait for someone to hand you a silver platter or tell you what to do. You can't wait for your manager to say, okay, this is your career path, or I'm going to help you get this next role. You have to help yourself. You have to be the one leading yourself and knowing how to manage yourself to get to where you want to go.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think partially generational, probably. That's how we were raised. If my father was raised in the environment that Philip Levine was describing, where he was standing in line waiting for someone to give him work, then maybe I would have been given a different story or told a different thing, like just survive, just get through work and then just get to retirement, and that's your goal.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
What's
that's
your thought on the generational thing?
well, I wonder sometimes because I feel like, the older generation, and you referenced having an older colleague who defined themselves by their work. I think that baby boomers and children of baby boomers, or the first children of baby boomers, were um, very much encouraged to define themselves by what they did. You go to a cocktail party, and the first thing that somebody says to you is, "What do you do?" As opposed to, what excites you, or what do you like to do in your spare time, or what, any number of things that you could ask about the person. We tend to sort of ask about what we do. I think that in a way, the younger generations have done a really great job of reminding the workplace and leaders that we all have different dreams. And this gets to the question we talked about before, how do you lead a team of people, maybe who are all motivated by very different things and all come into the workplace with an idea of really feeding very different kinds of dreams? Then how do you bring those people together in a meaningful way if the work isn't the identity that connects them? And how do you create the thing that will connect them? It makes for a really interesting challenge, but it also means that you can pull on lots of different kinds of experiences and expertise and points of view that maybe were never available in the workplace before, because we only thought in this kind of blindered way of saying, this is what we do from 9 to 5, and what we do afterwards is our own business, right?
Yeah, and I think everyone has different preferences. Like I remember the last team I was on, I had a colleague who she was good at what she did. She loved her work, but she left that in the office and went home to her family, and that was her mantra. She did not want work to become her life.
Yeah.
And she had no aspirations of moving up the corporate ladder, but she was highly talented. So how do you develop someone on your team who doesn't really want to move up the corporate ladder or be promoted into a leadership role, but she has an excellent skill set that needs to be leveraged and used for the team? How do you tap into her passions and get her excited about her daily work versus another person on the team who really is aspiring to be a leader one day and wants to be constantly challenged and eventually leave the team and move into different things? So just being able to have a unique approach for each team member on your team, understanding what that team dynamic looks like when you have those individual needs
Yes.
collectively.
Yeah.
How does that team look when you really look closely at those individual needs? That's where the magic really happens, when you are able to tune into the individual needs of each person, because it's not a blanketed approach.
No, it's not. And I think to be able to then say, all right, how do you craft or carve out the time to get to know what those individual needs might be as a leader or even as colleagues on a team, so that you can allow each person to bring their best to the work in a way that's consistent with who they are, and then also still reserve the energy to do the things that they really want to do. This made me think a little bit about, so many organizations have talked about purpose for quite a few years. And there was even a thread of literature that said that engaged employees are the ones whose purposes align with the purpose of the organization. And I've always scratched my head a little bit about that, because if you were to try to find a group of people who individually always have their purpose aligned with the purpose of the organization, then it feels like you'd have a lot of very like-minded people. And in many ways, what you want is people who aren't like-minded, so that you can find new ways of doing things. So sometimes these little phrases or these ideas that get popular, they don't make sense when you really think about it, given the nature of what work really is, to paraphrase the poem, right?
I had an interview over the summer with Lisa McLeod, who's a leadership consultant, and she authored the books "Selling with Noble Purpose" and "Leading with Noble Purpose." And I think purpose is an interesting one, because she was saying how she did this study with a pharmaceutical company. They were asking her to go out in the field with the sales reps and see if she could identify the top performers. So the ones bringing in the largest amount of revenue for the company. She had no background information. She just had to guess based on her field visits with them. She guessed the top 3 performers 100% correct.
Wow.
She found that those 3 sales reps were the ones who were the most purpose driven.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what the pharmaceutical company's purpose statement was, what they had published on their website, but the highest performing sales rep in the country for consecutive years in a row, she was the one who talked to her about a story where she was sitting in the office waiting to see a doctor, and an old lady came up to her and said, "Excuse me, miss, are you do you work for this pharmaceutical company?" Because she saw her name badge. And she said, "Yes, I do." And the woman said, "Your drug changed my life. I can now travel. I can pick up my grandkids without getting injured. My life has completely changed because of your drug. So I just wanted to say thank you." And she said every time she goes to see a doctor to talk about the new therapeutic the pharma company is bringing to market, she thinks about that lady who approached her, and that is her purpose. She comes to work knowing that she's making a difference in the lives of people like that woman. And so each of those 3 sales reps had a similar story. When another sales rep had a father who was a doctor, so he really understood what it was like to be a doctor and how hard the job is. So whenever he was talking to doctors, he could really be in their shoes and really talk their language and understand what they're going through. So I think, regardless what the company puts on their website, what their purpose statement is, I think, it comes down to self-leadership, right? Really understanding where your purpose is, what inspires you as a person, and then you can go out and apply it to your work, whatever your work is.
Yeah. That story reminds me a little bit of the parable of the cathedral builders. I'm sure you've heard this, that, if you talk to one mason who's building bricks and they say to them, what are you doing? And he says, I'm laying bricks for this church. And the next one says, oh, I'm laying bricks to build a beautiful cathedral. And the third says, I am laying bricks to connect man to God, So there's 3 different ways of looking at the exact same activity and how you're looking at that. And I know that gets used a lot in leadership training as a way of thinking about, are you building a cathedral or are you laying bricks, right? I mean, there's a way that you think about that. But what's interesting in the poem, and I think what the author is challenging us to think about, is the worker who's the narrator is waiting online to get work. And, ostensibly because this is what he does. He's going to feed his family, he's waiting, and you could have a whole conversation around, work and waiting and what that means in the course of a career. But he's going there for one particular purpose. But his brother is working as a way to feed his passion for opera, right? So does that make one a better worker than the other? Or how do we value the motivation in terms of what somebody brings to work? And does it change the way we think about them as a worker?
I think everyone has their own way of living life and combining hobbies with what they're doing in the workplace. And I think it's a poor assumption to make that your people are showing up and your company is what's encompassing their 90% of their life. If you're asking people to bring their whole selves to work, that includes the part of you that's learning German so you can sing Wagner. So I think we need to be cognizant of what that whole self means and embrace it rather than, ask people to hide it, or, you need to focus on this company and this company only and the work that you're doing here. Actually, great example. The last company I worked for was headquartered in Germany. If I'm studying German to sing opera songs, how could you apply that German language skill with your German colleagues, since you're working in a company that's headquartered in Germany? Maybe you have something that you can teach your coworkers who don't know German or don't understand the German language or the culture.
Yeah.
So I think everything's intertwined. There are ways that you can take your hobbies and your skill sets that are outside of work and you can bring it to the workplace and add value.
Absolutely. And I think this idea that somehow there's a single purpose and that purpose is what you have to feed ignores the fact that we each bring a unique angle or a unique twist or a unique perspective on why we do the things that we do. And maybe work as an end is just as good as work as a means to an end. But when you have a team full of people, understanding what motivates them may really be the key to being able to help them feel like they thrive in their work, and to have the team thrive itself, right? So there are these interesting tensions, right, between the things that we say about what work is supposed to be and the things that people experience when they actually go to work as individuals.
Reflecting on this poem and thinking about, the disconnect between workplace, home life, bringing your whole self to work, we're definitely at a crossroads right now. If we're senior leaders sitting at the table thinking about how do we evolve the workplace to really create an environment where people aren't so detached and disengaged and disenchanted, where do we even start? It almost seems like such a big challenge to try to solve, that I feel like leaders are so overwhelmed by it that they're just like, yeah, let's just go back to the return to office policies. That's easier.
And let somebody else manage the people. Yeah.
Yes.
It's daunting, right? It's daunting.
Yeah.
And this idea, I mean, in this tiny little piece, you get work-life balance. You get this question of work and why you're working, and motion and purpose and motivation. You get emotion. We didn't even talk about emotion, right? The idea of
Yeah.
emotion at work, and, a grown man seeing another man cry. That's
Yeah.
not, that's something that, we talked a little bit earlier about the emotion of managing people, and how
Hmm.
they're not equipped in the workplace to, figure out how to deal with that emotion in an effective and nurturing and supportive way. So that brings up all the issues of mental health that we talk about in the workplace. In these couple of stanzas comes this incredible insight into sort of the problem of work that we're facing in 2025, even though it was written all these years ago. So to go back to your original question, that's a little bit why I picked it, so I could show you what that's like. But I want to leave you with one more question about the poem. What will you keep chewing on? What will you continue to think about? And how might you bring something from this poem into your work right now, the work that you're doing every day today?
Yeah. No, that's an excellent question. This poem just drove me to think about this even further. It's something I've been chewing on for a while now, which is why I left corporate and am building a consulting firm that focuses on empathy in the workplace. Because to your point, I really do believe that people just aren't equipped to deal with emotions at work. And we're just not teaching leaders the right skills to not be afraid of
Mhm.
having difficult conversations and not be afraid of emotions, because we're all human. I just think it's so interesting. When I sat on a leadership team last year, I even had a couple of the leaders tell me, leave your emotions at home. It's almost like leaders are expected to be these stoic, non-emotional, look strong. They're the superheroes of the business. They can't be emotional because then it shows weakness, right? Especially with men. I do think men have this expectation of themselves that they can't express emotions openly, especially in the workplace. I saw this in my father, and you see this in this poem as well. This is a man
Yeah.
talking about seeing another grown man crying. And I think there's definitely this just assumption in society that you have to be strong and as a leader and you can't show your emotions. So I think we need to break that down a bit and create more vulnerability somehow among leaders, and teach them that it's okay, and practice it, right? Not just, to your point you said earlier, here, go be vulnerable now, have fun. It's like, well, how does that even work?
Right.
So I think that's where I come in, where I can help is coach people on these skills, and really help people feel comfortable with it and not be afraid of it, because I think that's what's going to carry us forward successfully as we lead people into the future workplace, whatever that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautifully said.
And what about you? What are you chewing on with this poem? I'm gonna throw
Well,
the question back at you.
I think of all the pieces that you talked about, and I think I'm very intrigued by this idea of that you raised this at the beginning, right? That we want to treat leaders, we want to treat people kind of like they're factory made widgets, that go plugging through. And yet we all bring such an individuality into a workplace. And for me, what this represents is maybe a call to action to keep doing the work that we're doing. And that is to create opportunities for people to say, who is this person that's sitting next to me in my workplace? What drives them? What motivates them? What wakes them up at night worried? And what is it that they dream of? Like what would they like to have happen in a world that, comes out exactly the way the way they envision in their dreams? Because I feel like if we could also create that space for people to get to know each other more personally as colleagues, then we begin to realize that we have so much more in common than we're different. I'm if I have time, I'll give you another story that really has always moved me. We were working with a leadership team of a manufacturing company, and the person who was in charge of sales, which you'll relate to, and the person who was in charge of project management were always at loggerheads with each other. And it makes total sense, right? Because their work is constantly sort of a yin and yang between, what do you promise the customer versus what can you deliver, within the company. Well, one day they were doing reflection point and they were reading a story. And in the story, there was a scene of a home where there was plastic on the couch. And plastic on the couch had it was a detail in the story. It had nothing to do with the story itself. It wasn't about the plot. It wasn't the characters, but they were painting a picture of this living room. And all of a sudden, these two individuals who were very much at loggerheads with each other and were taking it very personally said, wait a minute, I grew up with plastic on the couch. No, I grew up with plastic on the couch as well. And all of a sudden, they started to talk a little bit about their backgrounds. Both came from immigrant families. Both were in families where working hard and succeeding and doing well in school and being the best that you could possibly be drove everything that they heard from the time they were the youngest of children. And they realized that even though their work took them to very different ways of looking at things, their backgrounds were so much more similar than they realized that it changed the quality of the way they worked together. And so I think for me, what this poem reminds me of all the time is keep investigating who else is on that line. Who else is on that line waiting for work, working with you, working next to you? And how can we learn from each other? And how much can we see kinship in the people that, that we stand shoulder to shoulder with as we, try to solve the biggest problems that we face at work?
I love that. And I think that mindset will hopefully help us move away from this isolation crisis that we're in, where we're all feeling lonely. I mean, we're in a loneliness crisis in the United States.
Absolutely.
And I think it's because we keep distancing ourselves from others rather than extending a hand and just asking, where are you from? What's your background? Finding commonalities with our fellow humans. I mean, whether it's your neighbors, your colleagues, it doesn't matter. Just connecting with people and building bridges rather than burning bridges. I think that's how I would wrap things up today. Let's go build bridges.
Yes.
Let's reach out to our colleagues and our friends and our neighbors, and let's learn about each other. I really truly agree with you. We have so much more in common than we really think.
Yeah.
And there's a way we can connect with each other and learn from each other and build stronger teams that way. So I love the work that you're doing. And if any of my listeners want to learn more about you and Reflection Point, what would you suggest? You just go to the website, or do you have anything else you wanted to share?
It's Reflection Point, all one word, .org, because we're a nonprofit. If you send us a note through the contact page, I'm the one who gets it, so I'll respond. And so that's ideally the best. Although if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I would love it. I contribute to Forbes as well. So I'd love it if you read my pieces and maybe enter into a conversation about those things that I write about, which are usually around these topics of workplace culture and how to build more effective teams, how we can all work better together. So I look forward to talking to anybody who's interested in learning more.
Well, great. And let's keep the dialogue going. This is an important discussion, and it's not going to end anytime soon. There's a lot of work to be done to make the workplace a better place for all.
Absolutely. Hear, hear.
Thanks a lot, Anne. Nice to have you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for having me.
This podcast is designed to help busy business leaders create an inspired and engaged workforce. I am building a community of like-minded leaders and experts who all share the same passion. taking care of people at work. Whether you are a small business owner or work in a large corporation, you belong in this community. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. If you know someone who I should interview or you have topic requests, please connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.